Hello and welcome to episode 56 of the This Is The Music Meets podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Paul and Tristan from the Kynd, who have just released their masterpiece of a second album in Timelines. As well as talking about the new album, we're going to talk about the album launch gig in London last week and finding out why the band decided to get back together after almost 25 years. So Paul and Tristan, thanks for coming on the This Is The Music Meets podcast. How are you both doing today?
Great. Yeah, good. Yeah, good.
Great stuff. Great to have you both on, and I hope that you haven't been too affected by the windy weather that we've been experiencing in the south of England today.
It's been fine around here, actually. Not too bad at all. That's a typical way to start an English podcast, isn't it? We'll talk about the weather.
That's it. Get it in there nice and early. So kind of like then, before we sort of get into the actual, the album we've just mentioned there, kind of like growing up for you both, kind of like what was your like earliest sort of, musical sort of like memories or sort of like influences that sort of made you think, yeah, do you know what? I fancy sort of starting a band and, and obviously getting, eventually where you did end up.
Well, for me, I mean, obviously it'd be different for Tris. We didn't grow up together. As his loss. But anyway, the first band I really was passionate about was Adam and the Ants.
Right, okay, yeah.
I spent my pocket money on their singles, that kind of thing, and very soon after that, also the Beatles I really liked because my parents were really into or at least had a few Beatles records, and I was weirdly obsessed with them very young, even before I really knew their music. And I don't really know why, but yeah, when I was like sort of 3 or 4 years old, I was just weirdly obsessed by them. And I remember trying to learn their names, and I didn't really know their music at the time, but yeah, don't know. Somehow I'd picked that up as an infant,
Again, similar to Paul, Danny and I grew up in a household where music was ever present. Both my parents were really into music, and obviously as a young teen, obsessed with the music in the charts at the time, but also listening to a lot of stuff from the 60s and 70s that my mum and dad grew up with. So and being in a band was really as much a sort of a cultural rite of passage thing as a music thing for us. We wanted to do something cool and meet girls, really. And it wasn't until we all our drummer Bradley, Danny and I did grow up with 5 doors up the road from us all our lives, so we knew we had a drummer, and so we thought, well, that's a start. And then we just divvied the jobs up around the band, and Danny met Paul in the sort of registration group at school. I don't think we knew he could sing. We just knew he knew a load of lyrics. He was really obsessed with music, and he knew words. So we thought, naively thought that was that's all you needed, really. So, so we just fell into it, I think.
But starting off, the first music we sort of gravitated towards was our, well, I was going to say is our parents' generation, but actually it was probably a little bit before that, really. It was like sort of 50s rock and roll, like rockabilly.
Yeah, sure.
The first thing we started playing was things like, Buddy Holly and Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, that kind of thing. Again, and this is at school. This is like when we're, I don't know, I guess sort of 14, 15, something like this. And and then I think a little bit after that, maybe we did that for a couple of years and got a little bit of a local following, which was really weird. But just all of our friends liked the music we played. I guess they all knew it from their parents' record collection as well. But and then we began to write our own stuff, and obviously the stuff we wrote, being guys from sort of the home counties of that sort of age in that sort of era, was not rock and roll, and it was I guess we always thought of it as like power pop, really, very much like like the Beatles, like the Who, that kind of thing. But people, because of the era, people were like, oh, your songs sound indie. That's kind of indie, isn't it? Like, that's kind of, which, and we liked those sort of early indie bands that were coming out, the Stone Roses particularly, and Charlatans and stuff like that in the early 90s. So that was just the direction that we started to sort of go in.
Yeah, sure. And obviously mentioning there the sort of early 90s, obviously kind of like you were getting a lot of rave reviews, like with the sort of live bands and live gigs even. And obviously you sold out the iconic 100 Club. You had a residency as well at the at Dublin Castle, as well as some other like really historic London venues. So kind of like looking back at that, I mean, I can imagine like what fantastic times that must have been for you to to achieve those what we've just mentioned there. Are there any particular memories at all from those times, looking back at those gigs that you can really recall?
I think there was our manager who was I worked in a guitar shop, and he was the manager of the guitar shop, and saw us sort of floundering around a bit, and just said, "Look, somebody's going to look after you fellas." And he was sort of old school, so if we weren't playing, that was a waste of time. So we just, for probably from our very sort of late teens and early 20s, just played relentlessly, and that was back in the days in the 90s where there was a real circuit, and the university circuit was thriving, and you could just go up and down the country playing all the time. And when we sort of putting the band back together and going through the boxes in the loft of all the press cuttings and reviews and gig flyers and posters, just looking at our bookings diary, it was just relentless. I don't remember it being a slog. Obviously, as an older man now, it looks like Jesus Christ. But I just remember we were playing every night, and it was just fantastic. Just going to all these different places. Great crowds. It was a real audience for it then, obviously, and we still do. We've always just loved playing live, so it felt like a real treat. And obviously, when you're that age and you turn up and there's free booze and enthusiastic crowds, what a better way to spend your
no, definitely
early years. It was a really, I look back on it really fondly, and that might be with rose tinted glasses. Paul might have a different story, but
no, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I remember it being a lot of fun. It was particularly nice, I think, when we began to move out of our local sort of so I don't know, like maybe 20-mile radius around where we lived, and we started to go up to London, and we started to play those venues that you were talking about, like the 100 Club. I mean, I remember as a kid, for instance, walking along Oxford Street with my mum when I was just a little boy, and she pointed out the 100 Club to me and said, "Oh, that's a really famous venue. Only the best musicians get to play there," kind of thing, which actually turns out it's not true. But anyway, so playing there was great. I mean, we sold that out. I think we sold that out about 3 times. Also, the Marquee. One of my favorite, one of my favorite places or favorite memories was we did it was a Steve Marriott and sort of Small Faces sort of tribute night, but it was raising funds for Ronnie Lane, who obviously at the time was still alive but was suffering with multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
And that was to play at the Market. We basically did our own set, but peppered it with Small Faces covers.
Right.
And that was great to play there. But we also, I remember meeting Steve Marriott's mum, like this little old lady backstage, and she was like, "Oh, thank you for singing songs for us, Steve," and all this kind of thing. And that was just wonderful. And that's also where we met. That was the first night we met Andy Bell from Ride and later from Oasis. He was at the gig with I think Graham Coxon from Blur was there as well. I don't think they were together necessarily, but they were both there.
I was going to say, you've mentioned meeting Steve Marriott's mum, and there was Paul Weller was there, and the guys from Blur and Ride. Yeah, but it's Steve Marriott's mum that left the impression. That's great.
It kind of was though. It was sweet, the way she was just like, I just don't know. It felt sincere, and it touched me. I guess I don't know. It was nice.
It's now a Weatherspoons.
Such a shame, really, isn't it? That and it's happening not just with music venues. I think as you mentioned there, Weatherspoons as well. I think it's happening to them sort of places as well, that they're sort of making room, aren't they, for housing developments or whatever else. But just as well there, Tristan, you mentioned there about you doing like the university scene, just kind of like. It doesn't appear to be sort of happening as often now with that side of things. Do you think there's any particular reason why bands don't necessarily do that sort of circuit now? Is that, or do you think is it because of the newer generation where they want everything, like as of 5 minutes ago type of thing? They're not happy with is that a fair assessment to say?
I think when music, after that big explosion of, for want of a better term, guitar bands, and acts that could play live, and then as that, after that sort of mid, even late 90s stuff, a lot of the music scene started to become more dominated by pop acts and DJ acts and that sort of thing. And I think student unions just lost the art of live music promotion. There's still some unions up and down the country, and some universities who still do it really well, but that circuit disappeared. And while that circuit was there and those venues were reliant on bands, there was this constant stream of gigs and availability of places to play. And as soon as that broke down, it fell away quite quickly.
Yeah.
So and that was a real shame. And a lot of those venues still exist. So not to say it might never come back, but it's a shame for the young bands coming through now that I don't think there is that availability of gigs with big new audiences to go and play up in. And we could do 25, 30 dates up and down the country, every couple of months, and not playing the same venue twice.
Yeah,
that's probably because we weren't allowed back in some of them. But and I just don't think there is that. I don't think you could do that now as regularly as we did then. So that's a bit of a shame. But there you go.
Oh, okay, cool. So I agree with you. I think it is a bit of a shame. I think it must be a good way as well for bands to sort of try and what's the word I'm trying to think, like practice their art and playing in front of a live audience, which
it's
I guess
stagecraft, isn't it? It's learning that stagecraft, and that's really important. And also, it's just learning to be good. It's one thing to be to be able to play guitar or be able to sing and do it well in your bedroom. It's a whole other thing to get up in front of people and deliver it. And it's all that thing. It's not even it's not like we were doing dance routines and had to learn that, but it's about learning. It's about learning how to put a song across and do it, and how to hold an audience for an hour. And that those things are the only way you can learn that is to actually get your hands dirty and get out there and gig. And I do, I don't really know where younger people do that kind of thing now, or maybe they're just resigned to not playing live as much, and so much of their career is now online. They put videos out on YouTube, and it's the likes and the sort of shares and stuff like that that is their buzz that we used to get from a live audience. I'm not really sure, but I tell you what though, just to go back at something that I do remember, it was a great time, and it was lovely playing all these places. But something I do remember that always annoyed me at the time was that the record, our record label was so small, and that felt really. I just remember that feeling really frustrating at the time.
Right.
Mm.
When
we were lucky to be signed, a lot of bands never got signed, but I think. I guess it's always that you always want something better than what you've got, and I do remember that we were on a tiny little label and they didn't have a lot of money, and things seemed to take a long time. There was quite a lot of time gap between some of the singles and the album and stuff like that. And I remember enjoying the gigs. I remember enjoying being in the band. I remember enjoying being in the studio and writing songs and all of that. But I remember being very frustrated with our record label. That through no fault of their own. It's not like they were doing necessarily a bad job. It's just that they were not able to compete in and if we'd have been signed to, I don't know, Polydor or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, sure, definitely. And just sort of coming on to the debut album, obviously Shakedown, which did come out in 99. You've obviously had, as you mentioned already, Andy Bell was there sort of mixing and producing the album and all that sort of stuff. So the gig that you mentioned before with the the memorial for raising money for Ronnie Lane, was that kind of like then your first meeting with him then, or did that was it sort of then that you sort of asked him to get involved with you guys?
Well, I wasn't. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
So yeah, that's the first time we met him. It was actually the guys from the label who, through a friend of a friend, had got Andy involved to produce our first single. And it was one of those things. like, who are you going to get to produce it? He said, oh, we can get Andy Bell from Ride. And like, yeah, go on then. Because they were quite a small outfit, it was just like, sure. Yeah. If we don't get him, who are we going to use? So and I think we met him at that show, and then went and did some sort of pre-production stuff, and then went to Brian O'Shaughnessy's place in Bark that Andy had recommended, because Creation used to do a lot of their demos through there, and obviously Brian's a producer in his own right, so we had kind of, and he did went on to Brian to do the second single, but it was kind of through a friend of a friend, really. But we were huge fans, so we I remember when it first came up, it was like, yeah, well, let's see what happens. But it was really cool for us as genuine fans of Ride, and Andy's guitar playing particularly, to have him sort of knocking about the studio with us. That was one of those great parts of being in the band back in the day.
Yeah, and he was a really nice guy as well, and very easy to work with. In the studio, he was he loved the band, he liked what we were doing, he really got it, which is important, obviously. And I just remember working at Bark Studios with him, and I think Brian O'Shaughnessy basically was engineering and he was sort of producing it. But I just remember those sessions being a lot of fun, and I think they sound good. I think the stuff we recorded with him, so I had that energy that we had live. We've sort of quite a sort of dynamic band live, and I think it's not always that easy to capture that on record, but I think he managed to do that.
Yeah, and I think that must be quite a frustrating thing as well, if as a band, if that's not being what you were just saying there about the sound, like how you sound live, if that then doesn't come across on.
Well, we'd done quite a few demo tapes. We used to do a demo tape, sell it at gigs as a way to try and make some money. And we'd had that. We'd done demo tapes in little sort of local studios, and we'd been like, oh, it just sounds really flat and really. So in a way, that was kind of good, because I think we were very much geared up to capturing that sound, our live sound, when we were really sort of focused on capturing some kind of excitement in the recordings. And I think that's something that we've carried. Again, it's just what you were talking about before. It's about learning your craft. It's about learning how to make good records as much as it is about how to be a great live band. And obviously with somebody like Andy Bell and or Brian O'Shaughnessy to help guide you through the process, that is that's achievable. So yeah, but I think we'd made our mistakes on our demo tapes.
Great stuff. So kind of like then fast forward, it was about 2001, I think it was. You obviously got back together for a series of reunion shows. Obviously, were a combination of sort of headline shows, and there was a couple of festival appearances as well. So kind of like, why did you decide after that sort of period of time to get back on stage again?
I don't know.
Yeah, for me, it was because Danny made me. I don't know about you, Paul.
I was forced into it. Yeah, but if I blink twice, that means I need rescuing.
It's more, I think all the stuff on the internet says we split up acrimoniously, but we've always remained friends, and jammed, and we've always been.
We didn't remain friends. We didn't remain friends with all of the band. There was some acrimony. There was definitely some acrimony. Don't try and sugarcoat it.
I love everybody. It's all good. And so certainly Paul, Danny, and I have played music together for fun, and we've all been carried on involved playing with different bands and different projects, and we talked about it in the past, but it never was the right time. But I think over lockdown we spent a lot of time talking on Zoom and that sort of thing. I think it's finally like, well, if we don't do it now, we'll never do it. And it just happened to time with the anniversary of our first single, so that at least there was something to pin it on.
Yeah.
So and I think we kind of, I'm terrible at remembering the chronology. It's easy for me to say the timeline. Oh, look what I've done, the timeline. But Paul will correct me. I think when we decided to go and do a gig we'd already made we should play some songs, some of the ones that never got heard before. If we're going to do it, I don't know how many we'll do and how many gigs we'll do, or if it will become a full album. But let's not just rehash the old stuff. Let's try and add something new. And then it just grew from there. I think we were all a bit surprised at how the attention that those first few shows got, and people coming out of the woodwork and flying places to come and see it. And so that obviously that's a bit of an ego boost, isn't it? And that's what Danny needs to become like a relentless hound. So that's what happened.
But I think with the shows, we're one of these bands that I don't think because we were a bit of a cult band back in the day that it's almost like our reputation had sort of started to grow a little bit amongst record collectors and people that are really big fans of indie, 90s indie music or Britpop music or whatever. And what record collectors are like, they always like an obscure band that are really good, and we kind of fit that bill. So our reputation had grown a little bit, but we were definitely surprised by the fact that we sold out those first two reunion shows. Tristan's right. That's exactly as I remember it. That the idea was, because when we split up, there was interpersonal problems within the band, but also at the same time, our record company basically went under. So we were left without a deal, and it was like, well, it seems like the universe is telling us it's time to stop. But we were already prepping for the second album, so we'd already demoed at least, I think, 5 songs or something for the second album, and we were already playing those songs live in our live set right towards the end. So I think there was definitely the idea, well, we should play those songs. And but yeah, once we saw how much people were into it. Because the reunion shows were great, that they were a real mixture of people that had seen us back in the day, and also people who had only heard about us in the last 10 years. And and they were like, oh, I never thought I'd get to see you play. And it's like, here you are. And then out of that grew the whole thing of, oh, well, maybe we would do this second album, and maybe we'd use some of the tracks that we were already prepping, along with some stuff that's been written since, and some new stuff that we wrote together since lockdown, since we got back together. And that's how it all came about, really.
So it was then off the back of the live shows that you decided to sort of get back in the studio then and record, and obviously what would eventually become Timelines.
I think if they'd have gone terribly, we wouldn't have entertained it. But and it's nice having the new guys in the band, Finn on drums and Tom on keyboards, and having a unit back together and playing those songs. Just remembered how much we enjoyed it. So gave it a sort of new lease of life. So it wasn't just retreading those steps. It was doing something sort of new and for us at least valid. But Paul's like, people were saying, oh, I never thought I'd get a chance to see you live. And I thought, well, really? I hope this hasn't let you down horribly. But
well, I think the reaction, I think it's been fair to say that definitely wasn't the case. So obviously, as we said, Timelines obviously was released on Friday. It's received fantastic reviews and had great support across social media. I'm guessing that you, both of you, and obviously your brother as well there, Paul, that you're delighted with the response that you've had to that.
Yeah, it's very flattering. I mean, of course, when you put anything new out, I mean, I think we thought it was really strong. I think we really feel that it blows the first album, Shakedown, into the weeds, really. But then, of course, I always think, the artists themselves is probably the least well suited to judge their own work. And everybody always thinks their most recent stuff's their best, of course. But but no, I think, we felt really confident that we'd produced a really great album that was, just had better song craft, sounded better, was more exciting, and just an all-round much better package. And so it's really nice that when it's finally come out, that not just fans of the band are responding really well to it, but critics and some people like Pete Perfides who heard it and said some really, he's a great journalist and somebody I know that all of us look up to in terms of somebody who you would point to and say he's a great rock journalist. So for him to for him to be on board with it and be like, this is a really good album, then that's obviously very flattering,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And kind of like what then was the recording process like for the album? Was it, kind of like camping back into a studio like how you were describing earlier on, or was it sort of a bit more of a, the modern way, I guess, so to speak, with, using phones and sending clips over to each other? And how did that work?
Well, the demo, sorry, go on.
Well, so I'll probably, well, hopefully we'll say the same thing.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
Certainly the first half of it was that modern way, like you described. So all of us sending ideas, emailing stuff, a lot of stuff just done on Bandcamp, on laptops, sort of digging out the old demo tapes. Paul said we had some pretty decent demos for a good chunk of it made right back in the day. And then we worked up other stuff at Danny's place, or Paul would just email something over. So that was all quite modern. But by the time we got to make the album proper, it was really important to us that we did it as if we were recording the album when it should or could have come out back in early 2000s. And which is why we went back to Bark Studios, which hasn't. We were also we knew it hadn't changed. Which is why we wanted to go back. But I mean, it literally hasn't changed. The same headphones 20 years later, 25 years later, whatever it is. And we wanted to do it using the same technology, the same equipment, and some of those things that it might be a bit more restrictive than some of the modern technology we could have used. It was also probably helped us be a bit more creative and worked around it. And we loved the sound of that all the old gear and all the analog stuff as well. So I think it seemed to work. Yeah. So I think the first half of it was quite a modern sort of contemporary way of doing it, but by the time we actually to make the album proper, it was more sort of old school. Although I mean, certainly Paul, both Paul and Danny, did some stuff at home that we then used in the final album, just because it's just so much easier now to make good quality recordings, out in the field, as it were.
Sure. And looking across the album track listing, have you got a sort of like a favourite song at all? Maybe one that might mean a little bit more to you personally than one of the others?
I think they all mean a lot to all of us. I think it's really hard to sort of choose. There are the ones that I tend to, my initial sort of thing when you would ask a question like that is to point to the ones that I think have come off the most satisfactorily, I guess, that the idea behind them has been most sort of fully realized. And straight away I would point to the two singles that came out for it, Whispers and Tones and Older. I think that both of those songs came out great. They really came out in a way that it was the recordings or the versions of them that they deserved. And also there's a song called Effervescent on the album, which is came out of a jam and is in all honesty, I mean, it's a nice little piece of music, but it's not that much of a song. But the way that it was done on the album, that's really successful. And a number of people have said to us, "Oh, I really like that one because we've done the best job by that song." So there's things like that I really feel like, but I really feel that, and I think I would speak on behalf of all of us when I say that we feel that all 12 tracks are at least pretty bloody good. Because I mean, there's no false modesty here. I'm not going to say oh, it's rubbish, because I honestly don't believe that. I believe it's really good and deserves a much wider audience.
Agreed.
I was put that song Effervescent that predated the first album. We wrote that really early on, actually, and it was one of those ones that had just been knocking around. What other songs have we got? And it almost tried it in the studio. I think, well, let's just see. We should give it a go. And by the time we finished it, it was like, Oh, bloody hell. And there's a couple of Homespun Genius was a very early one as well. That's on the record that once we'd finished it, I think, Paul just said then, absolutely, right, that's the version it deserved. That, that's going on now. And I've listened to it quite a bit since I don't know, stuff we've recorded in the past or with other people. Once you've done it, it's kind of, it so well, it takes you a while to come back to it. But actually, this record, especially getting it back on vinyl, is which I think it just really brings out the best in it. I've listened to it quite a bit, and I have different favorites all the time. Sure. Something sonically really pleases me, or the particular performances. So, I couldn't put my finger on it. At the moment, it's Workshy. Quite a few people have picked out Workshy, and that would not, before the record, would not have been one of my favorites. But I think you made it track of the day today, did you?
I did, yes. I just like the sort of, how it sort of kicks off at the beginning, how explosive it is. And I think that just, it's like, a real statement of intent. We're back, obviously we've done the two singles, but just a great way, in my opinion, to kick off the album.
Well, the other two were really keen that I wasn't sure that should be the start. But Paul, we start a lot of our live shows with it, but just because of exactly how you described, it is a bit of a statement of intent. Yeah. And it does actually, I've got to admit they were right on that one. It does provide a really sort of kick-ass start to the record. So fair play, lads.
Great stuff. And obviously you just mentioned there sort of like the live gigs. Obviously you played at 93 Feet East in London last week. So kind of like how was it for you? Because looking across the socials, the feedback looks absolutely superb.
Yeah, it was good. It was really great. It was actually probably one of the. I think it's probably the best gig we've played since we reformed, which was kind of great as it was the album launch sort of celebration, and it was nice to really pull it out of the bag. I mean, we always play well. It's pretty unusual that we don't, but sometimes you can't really sort of say why, but just sometimes a particular gig just it suddenly becomes really elevated, and the crowd were great as well. That obviously plays a really big part of it into it because you sort of feed off of them.
Yeah.
So it was a rush. It was great.
Great stuff. And how about, was that the same for you as well, Tristan?
Yeah, absolutely. Paul's right. They're really good. I mean, it was a really warm audience. Obviously, that people had come to support the launch of the record. I think Paul described it on stage as a celebration, and it was. There's quite a lot of energy has gone into trying to get this record out, and to actually have it out there was a sort of a big relief, as much as anything. So, and it felt like a celebration. It did feel like a bit of a party as much as a gig. So that it was great fun, and I haven't been back to 93 Feet East since the 90s probably. I don't know. I can't remember the last time I was there. So it was good night, really good night.
Great to hear, and obviously and understandably, the set list obviously was very heavy on timelines. Sort of moving forward, do you think that's going to sort of remain the case, or do you think you might sort of maybe include a few more songs from album one?
Well, I guess we'd probably do more of a half and half. I mean, we obviously focused quite heavily. I think we played 11 of the 12 tracks from the album, from Timelines. I think going forward we probably would bring, perhaps dial that back a little bit and bring in a few from the first album. But of course the new stuff has an appeal because it's new, and there's new stuff that that we're writing that is sort of been written since Timelines was done. So that you might find some of those songs begin to sort of creep into the set list as well. So yeah,
we've got a few cornerstones of the set that we don't feel, rightly or wrongly, we don't feel we can leave out. But there's certainly some ones of Shakedown and of around that period that if we I think we played for over an hour and a half. So if we had more time, we're still keen to play and fun to play. So we like to mix it up and chop it about. A few weeks ago we played down in Hastings and we did 3 sets in 3 different venues on the same night.
Yeah.
And we tried to put different songs in each set, you know, 'cause we've got quite short attention spans. So, you know, we do like to mix it up, so that there'll definitely be a bit of old and a bit of new. And like Paul said, maybe even newer. Who knows?
Wow. Well, it certainly sounds like it's going to be anyone coming down to any future gig is going to have a ball, and it's going to be a really, really exciting night. So kind of like then that leads me on to what sort of then are the Kynd's plans for the rest of 2023?
I think world domination. We've got that lined up just before Christmas.
or crushing obscurity. Could go either way. Could go either way.
We've got our next show that we can announce currently is the Friday, the 16th of June in Oxford.
Yes.
We're playing with 2 fantastic bands, The Institutes and Syracuse, who on a 3-band bill were put together by the fanzine Speakeasy.
Yeah.
And that's at the Jericho Tavern in Oxford, which again we have not played for 25 years. So so that'll be really good fun. And we used to play a lot in Oxford, so I'm looking forward to going back there. There's some festivals coming up and some more live dates. So and hopefully a 3rd single off the album. We're going to treat it like a Michael Jackson album. There might be 9 singles.
Brilliant. Absolutely love that. Well, thank you both for coming on to This Is The Music Meets podcast. I've really, really enjoyed getting to chat to both of you and finding out quite a lot more about the Kynd, and obviously discussing Timelines, which is out now. And I believe you've still got some copies left of the album on vinyl over on your Bandcamp store as well. So we'll include the link to that in the episode bio.
And it's on eBay as well. You can get it off eBay.
So as well as being able to purchase Timelines from the Kynd's Bandcamp store on limited edition vinyl or CD, you can, of course, stream or download it from all of the usual places. And we will include those links as well as the Kynd's social media platforms in the episode bio for you. All that leaves me to say is to thank everyone who has listened to the latest This Is The Music Meets podcast. Please subscribe so you never miss out on any brand new episodes. And if you're loving the podcast, show us some love by giving us a 5-star rating and written review, as it really does help the bands and artists we interview to be discovered. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again very soon.